You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I'm hosting a discussion about violence among football supporters. In recent weeks, there have been a string of high-profile incidents where players have been subjected to violent abuse from the stands. On Sunday, Manchester United's Rio Ferdinand was hit by an object, thought to be a coin thrown from the crowd, as he celebrated his side's winning goal against rivals Manchester City in a hotly contested derby. This season, Kirkland, goalkeeper for Sheffield Wednesday, was hit in the face by a Leeds fan who invaded the pitch. Meanwhile, German clubs have announced a number of new security measures to protect players and fans from an upsurge in violence. But in Brazil, one Argentinian club has accused Brazilian security officials of violent abuse and pulling guns on its players during half-time at one of South America's biggest cup finals in São Paulo. British football had in recent years been lauded as a sport that had cleaned up its act. Stadiums were touted as family-friendly venues, and much had been done to stamp out racism and xenophobia. But are we heading back to the dark days when the terraces were a testosterone-fuelled tribal zone? Joining me in the studio to discuss this is Michael Jarman, a former professional footballer and Chief Equity Strategist, Dr. Victor Thompson, a sports psychologist, and on the phone, Steve Powell, Director of Policy at the Football Supporters Federation, and Jamie Jackson, Manchester football correspondent for The Guardian and Observer newspapers. Now, Gary Lineker tweeted this week, he compared hatred in the game to the norovirus, which is obviously very prevalent at this time of year. That's the very nasty stomach bug. Steve Powell from the Football Supporters Federation, this string of recent incidents, is this just anger just boiling over?
I think it's very easy when we now live in a 24/7 news cycle to get things blown up out of proportion. I mean, clearly those incidents have happened, both the incidents of racial harassment and insults and the coin throwing at Old Trafford are entirely unacceptable. The people who commit those offences are criminals, and they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law and receive legal bans from attending football matches. There's absolutely no doubt about that at all. And it's often the fact that it's missed about any incident related to football, whether it's violence or whatever criminal offence it is. The single biggest group that are affected are football fans themselves, particularly when it comes to offences of violence. When people start lobbing stuff in football grounds, it's just as likely that a fan is going to get hit as a player. And clearly, we've heard from Gordon Taylor, the Chief Executive of the Players' Union, the PFA, and he's got a clear job to look after his members, because after all, the pitch is their workplace, or one of their workplaces, along with the training ground. I don't think these incidences are increasing. In fact, we know they're not. If you look at the statistics, the number of arrests and criminal prosecutions are going down. And there are less and less police in football grounds because they're less and less needed inside the football ground. And that's good news for everybody. But we do have to be very vigilant, and we do have to ensure that when these criminal acts occurred, that the prosecutions follow. These aren't just isolated incidents. There's a string. Just in Britain, take, for example, last Sunday with Rio Ferdinand, but also we had the Kirkland incident back in October. This week, Germany's top two divisions, all the clubs from Germany's top two divisions have agreed to crack down on crowd violence. There are allegations in Brazil over Brazilian security officials beating up and pulling guns on players during a major cup final. This is quite a prevalent issue, isn't it? It's nothing to be complacent about, and we've all got to keep our eye firmly focused on ensuring that wherever these issues happen, they're dealt with, and the best that is done to prevent them happening again in the future. But I grew up in football in England and Wales in the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s, where it wasn't at all unusual to see pitch battles every week, mass throwing of coins, bottles, all kinds of objects at people. Thankfully, we don't see that anymore, but because we now live in a media-saturated environment, every single incident receives, and it's right that they should. I'm not saying that they should be brushed under the carpet by any means, but if you analyse the different incidents, the statistics tell you they are less frequent than they used to be. We need perhaps to get the picture again. And we've got to that level now with the latest generation of information technology where people will be detected, they will be prosecuted, and they will be banned from the ground. And hopefully we can put these recent couple of incidents that we've had behind us. I'm actually, strangely enough, I'm more worried, rather than the coin throwing and the pitch invasions, I'm more worried about a slight resurgence in racial insults. And we haven't seen, fortunately, we haven't gone back to the era of the 1970s and the mass racist chanting that we used to hear. But there are too many people who think that a license to let off a bit of steam in a football ground is a license to say or do what you like. It isn't. It's completely unacceptable. And I would put homophobic insults in exactly the same box.
Well, I'd like to bring in Jamie Jackson from the Guardian and Observer. Can we first pick up on Steve's point about media hype? Would you say that this is just media hype?
It's interesting because what Steve said about the 24-hour news cycle, I don't know, is that maybe not the same case for the racist stuff, in that there's greater scrutiny now, TV cameras everywhere, so maybe there's a climate where players and officials, whoever, supporters, feel they can complain more and sort of raise it more. So I'm just wondering whether that there is a regression, or is it just being highlighted more? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, is it a media hype thing? I don't know. I'm always a little bit concerned about when I hear that, just because it seems like quite an easy way to say, oh, you know, there's a 24-hour news cycle. But I do take Steve's point. I don't know. I mean, these things are being reported because they are now isolated. Everyone's like, you cannot do that at all. Whereas before, people were like, oh, you know, Joe Bloggs down the road said that yet again. That's what happens every week. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I'm not completely sure what the answer is, but I think it's very good and very healthy that we are having this conversation. There's a debate going on, an ongoing debate, you know, about this, that it matters, that it's on the agenda. Obviously, the actual behaviour itself needs to stop because it's horrible, basically.
I'm not accusing the media of hyping something, getting it out of proportion. I'm just saying the mere fact that every single incident now comes to the attention through the electronic 24/7 media, where that wasn't necessarily the case. I can tell you some horrible incidents that I know never got media coverage through the 70s and 80s, because there wasn't the live television, there wasn't the mass media market that there is now. But it is very healthy that we have these debates and we constantly make sure that we're not getting complacent and thinking that we solve problems that aren't completely solved. In some cases, a lid has been put on the problem, but we haven't dealt with the underlying causes. I mean, just look at the debate that's going on at the moment about UEFA's reaction to what happened in Serbia at the Serbia versus England under-21 international. Henry Winter in the Daily Telegraph this morning gave UEFA both barrels, and I think quite rightly too. And a lot of players are very critical, particularly black players here, are very critical about the stance of the Football Association, the Premier League, and even their own union, the Professional Footballers Association, about paying a bit too much lip service and no real action, because the game is still too lily-white in too many areas.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'd quite like to bring in Dr. Victor Thompson here. You're a sports psychologist. Now, Steve Powell said that, you know, going to football matches was just a way of letting off steam. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think for a lot of people it can be when the working week is difficult, or in the current economic climate when maybe you don't have a job, that you go reliably at the weekend to support your team, to be with friends and family, and to get into the spirit of the game. And I think if you're angry and frustrated about life, or you're happy about life, then that will, you know, probably become more so when you're on the terraces and supporting. And I wonder if some of the difficulties during the 80s were linked to some of the stuff going on nationally in Brixton and other parts of the country, when there was more sort of anger and hostility and dissent amongst the nation.
Could we say that today it's because of maybe economic trouble?
Well, I think when you step into a football ground, you don't leave the rest of your life behind in the context that you're in. So, you know, I'm not saying it's all down to that, but if it's having an impact on you outside football, then when you go to the football pitch, it may, when you're supporting, spill over into your behaviour when you're supporting.
Michael Jarman, I'd like to bring you in.
Yeah, I mean, interesting points. Football's just a passionate sport, isn't it, really? I think, that's it resonates from the players, where you've seen high-profile players swearing live on TV once they've scored a goal, all the way to fans throwing coins on pitches when someone goes up and celebrates in front of the away crowd. Whether, there's macroeconomic influences that are outside that psychologically that tweak you and make you more angry when you go into, possibly. I mean, the person who threw the coin last Sunday may have been just naturally an angry person. Yeah, so some fans obviously take it very passionately. They go to the game. For some individuals, it's their religion. And, the clash as big as, especially what we saw last weekend between United and City, I think it was just a very late winner and a few emotional fans. It wasn't just one guy, because there was a few coins that you could see actually hitting the pitch.
Do you think that footballers have a responsibility not to kind of egg on the fans?
It's a passionate sport. Yeah, I think, what do you want to do? Suck the emotion out of the game? There was a situation again last year between, I think, Wayne Bridge and John Terry and Luis Suarez and Everest shaking hands. I don't think you really can start sitting there saying to people, no, stop behaving. You score a goal, you want to celebrate, and you enjoy that moment with the fans that have travelled up to there.
What is it about football that inspires this sort of thing? I mean, it doesn't happen in rugby, does it?
What was the saying? They say, I think football is a gentleman's sport watched by hooligans, and rugby's a hooligan sport watched by gentlemen. It doesn't make sense. It's literally, like you said, the predominant sports that is followed is football. And I think when you get that whole herd mentality going, naturally you're going to get a lot of different opinions, and I think it's the opinions that then cause the rifts, and the rifts that then creates the passion.
Dr. Victor Thompson?
Yeah, I think, like I said, a couple of interesting things there that I definitely agree in. One is that it's a very emotional game and emotional sport, and sport is so important to the fans and so important to the players that can overspill at times in good and bad ways, and also that it's somewhat tribal with the groupings. It's them and us. You've got your kit on, your supporters kit, you're home or you're away, and I think some of the research has shown that the violence in fans actually increases between players when it's a very tight match, and Manchester is quite famous for their derbies, but it's also seen elsewhere in the NBA in the States that there's increased aggression between players and hostility in crowds when it's very tight, and some of that, is probably not planned. But if you're trying to sway the game one way or the other, as a fan or as a player, then you play within the rules, and some people go beyond the rules because they either have their emotions that overtake them, or they've got slightly different rules about what's right and wrong.
Steve Powell?
Yeah, I think everybody's got a responsibility, and I've had the great good luck to watch professional football on every continent of this planet. And if you think the reaction is passionate here, you want to go and watch matches in Argentina, just to take one example. You will never see passion. It is electric. I went to a friendly match last year when I was in Argentina. It was the start of the season friendly match. There were 25,000 people there, and you would have thought it was the cup final. But it is important that doesn't turn into violence. That can be difficult at times when you're dealing with a lot of people. I don't want to see players not celebrating goals. But there is a responsibility not to deliberately provoke the crowd. But there is equally a responsibility on the crowd. And this is something we're big on, calling for self-policing. So we fans have a responsibility to have a word with somebody who's going OTT and say, no, you're going too far here. That's enough. That'll do. There's no call for it. Just because players earn a lot of money, they're entitled to protection at the workplace, the same as every other worker is. We've all got carried away at times, and that's why the influence of self-policing is so important. Because you're never going to have a policeman or a steward sat next to every supporter. But if other supporters are saying, hang on a minute, that'll do, you're going too far here, then that's the ideal form of policing, I think, and that's what we want to work towards.
Isn't that to touch on the vigilante side, though? I mean, kind of taking it into their own hands, into the supporters' hands?
No, the last thing we would suggest is that we want to generate have-a-go heroes, but we've all been in situations where somebody's had a word, somebody's getting a bit out of hand at a party, and somebody just says, hold on a minute, you're a little bit drunk. I think the best thing you can do is get a cab home. And it's that sort of approach. If somebody rears up and starts getting aggressive, well, no, we'll say, I'm sorry, mate, I've tried to have a word now, I'm going to go and talk to the stewards of the police. In the end, the order has got to be enforced by the people who are properly authorised and trained to impose order. But there is the quiet word, and I've found that it's worked effectively the couple of times that I've done it, and people have actually been quite shamefaced, and they've said to me out the game, you're absolutely right, mate, I was totally out of order there.
Jamie Jackson, would you say that's a wise idea?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because I think, as in life, as in football, you self-police yourself, you in life. Part of that is a word from your peers, from your immediate peer group. You can make the person in question feel a little bit embarrassed, hopefully. More or less always a lot stronger coming from sort of fellow supporters. And as Steve said, if it's not done in an aggressive way, it's done in a quiet way, then you're immediately, hopefully, bringing down the pitch of that person. Obviously, if they had a few drinks and they're really, really off the scale, they might take it as an insult, but still think it's worth doing. It is difficult, isn't it? Because if you're at a game and you're having a drink and a laugh, okay, banter, people can get carried away. But I still think that isn't an excuse for sort of throwing a coin. I know no one's saying that. How it gets to that stage, I don't know. I mean, in terms of players not celebrating, they've got to be able to celebrate. And yeah, they have a responsibility. Everyone does in life. This is kind of what we're talking about. But, I was there at the game. Phil Jones sort of turned to where we were sitting, the stand where we were sitting as the press. And that's obviously all City fans, when Van Persie's goal went in. And in a perfect world, you don't want that to happen. But I can understand it. We're all human beings, you know.
Yeah, but gents, you can't control that. It's something physically impossible. You cannot sit there. The abuse that the football players take week in, week out, some of the stuff that I hear singly, and some of the stuff that I've even received myself playing at a lot lower level, it's frightening. So, yeah, naturally, emotionally, like you said, if the fans are going to get it, they've got to be able to take it as much as that. And it's not like the players are running up to them and saying a lot of profane things to them. They've scored a goal, they're celebrating, and they happen to celebrate in front of the home crowd or the away crowd. I don't think you can control that. But going back to the point of we can try and police it ourselves and kind of look after the crowd and have a word. I mean, look, courage to you. I'll take my hat off in with the greatest respect. I mean, I went to watch Palace Millwall not too long ago, and there was a crowd of maybe about 50 fans, Crystal Palace fans. This is at Selhurst Park, who are all hooded up and caps down. And now I'm 6'3". I think I can handle myself. But to go into a stand where I know that there's going to be a small segment of maybe, I don't know, 100 fans who are kind of wired to the max, maybe slightly tipsy as well, had one too many to drink, I don't think I'd feel comfortable walking up to them saying to them, look, boys, you're being a bit too rowdy, and I've got my son with me, do you mind packing in the swearing? I mean, in a utopian society it would be perfect. I'd love to be able to sit there and say, guys, and they'll be giving me a great response back and we're all okay. But I just don't think it's going to happen. I think the best thing we can do is make examples of those that are caught. So there are police, there are stewards who are in the crowd that are there to kind of monitor the situation. If they can see a small segment of the crowd getting out of control, the stewards will walk up to the police, say, look, them three, them four up there, I've had a quiet word with them, they're still causing trouble, out they go. And then the punishment of what they receive, whether it's a ban for the rest of the season, they can't come back, they need to be made an example of, and then from there, hopefully people will look and say, I don't really want to be going down the same road as them. That's why it happens in, again, I've just taken completely off of the subject of what we're talking about. In Saudi Arabia and some of the capital punishment they have out there, you're caught stealing, they'll take your hand off in the middle of the road. That's why people can walk out and leave their business doors open, because they know they don't want to be going down that same path.
Well, in Germany, the top two divisions, they voted in favour of stricter stadium checks, crackdown on flares, smoke bombs, stricter punishments for offenders, extra surveillance, and probably most importantly, more training for security staff. Is this what needs to happen in other countries, including Britain?
I think 110%. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a few smoke bombs that were set off in the Manchester derby last week. I kept seeing blue smoke arising from the ground. And yeah, I think we got the technology to do it. I mean, I've seen a little while ago again in a Chelsea game, there was one of the fans who was singled out making a monkey chant at Danny Welbeck. And I don't know who managed to capture that on TV, because there's so many people to kind of keep your eyes on within the space of the game. But the good thing is, look, in a stadium of 50,000 people, it's not 50,000 people who are going wild. They're all screaming and cheering and chanting songs. But you can kind of isolate where, and it's normally in typical ends where there's a certain crowd that will always go to that game, and they'll be sitting in a certain seat where you can kind of monitor them and say, right, okay, these 10, these 15, they've been coming for the last week, 2 weeks, a month. They're getting out of hand now. Maybe it's time that the ship sailed its course and they need to be getting out of it. So yeah, I definitely agree. They need to be a lot more strict on that.
Steve Powell?
We have to be careful. There has to be a balance here. And I think you talk to any policeman, they'll tell you it's the certainty of detection, which is the deterrent, and prosecution, not the penalty. There's a little bit too much loose talk at times about life bans for everything. You don't want to go to the other end where anarchy reigns and nobody is ever held accountable for anything. That's entirely unacceptable too. So you're always trying to find a balance where anybody who gets out of hand in the ground will absolutely know if they're not pulled on the day, they're going to get a knock on the door on Monday morning, and the policeman is saying that there's a summons, come and see the magistrate. And they know that there's going to be reliable evidence, and they are going to get prosecuted. And if they keep on doing it, they're going to go to jail, and they're certainly going to get a banning order for 3 years to stop them going to football.
Dr. Victor Thompson.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, because I think if the fan thinks that if there's certain action, if they shout something that's racist or they swear a lot or they throw something, that there's going to be something undesirable happen, whether it's a tap on the shoulder by a fatherly figure behind them saying, oi lad, calm it down, or whether they think the CCTV is bound to pick them up later and they're going to be banned and not being able to go there for the next 5 games with their mates, then they'll think twice. And I think when you see that happening, either it's sort of policed by other fans or the police or the stewards do something that makes you think twice, then I think that's good, whichever source it comes from that works to motivate that person just to think and to pause and to not let their anger and being riled up spill over into something that isn't good for them or anybody else around them.
Again, I'm just going to go back into the point that I know you said, Steve, that it's the idea of the fact that they could face some form of punishment will act as a deterrent. I don't think it will, buddy. And I think it's slightly hypocritical as well. I was stopped in the street a couple of weeks ago because I said a few unpleasant things to a bus driver who decided to cut me up, and the police officer was straight over to my car, making me aware of what I had just done and saying, if you don't calm down, you'll be summoned in front of a court. And so why is it any different at a football game? I think if someone's caught red-handed, misbehaving, especially if some of these fans, I want to go to games with my son. He's 6 years old. I can't take him to games because I know some of the profanity he would be exposed to. I think if you've got them red-handed, whether you do it on the day or you do it a week later and you turn up at their door, the punishment needs to be delivered, and it needs to be fairly, I wouldn't say severe as in going to the extent of where they're losing limbs, but this whole, in introducing bans, you can't come to any home games or away games, you're going to be put on a log for the rest of the season. That will prevent people from misbehaving, I think, and they'll lose the right of the privilege to be able to go and watch and support their team, which is obviously what most teams don't want.
We've got too many cases in the Football Supporters Federation that have been going for the max all the time. It is an offence to enter a football ground drunk. We've got applications for banning orders for people saying, well, no, hold on a minute, they've already been taken to court and they've been fined. The banning orders should be saved for offences of gross insult, like racial insults and xenophobia, or offensive violence in or around football. It's that otherwise, because if you keep on going to the max, then it becomes unfair. I think it's just the punishment fits the crime. I don't disagree. You're never ever going to completely eliminate. You're never going to get everybody to also police themselves. So there does have to be some external control. But banning orders have been uncannily successful. Over 90% who received a banning order who return to football never offend again, and that's a really high number if you look at our miserable record with recidivism of people we send to prison, which just become universities of crime. The impulse to punish is very important, but it also has to be an impulse to rehabilitate. Otherwise, we just end up in the situation the United States are in, where they're spending absolute fortunes locking up huge numbers of their society.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. I'm Tim Walklate, and today I'm hosting a discussion about violence among football supporters. Joining me in the studio to discuss this is Michael Jarman, a former professional footballer and Chief Equity Strategist, Dr. Victor Thompson, a sports psychologist, and joining us on the phone is Steve Powell, Director of Policy at the Football Supporters Federation, and Jamie Jackson, Manchester football correspondent for The Guardian and Observer newspapers. We're running out of time, so I just want to ask finally, is it slightly embarrassing for football how united the crowds were at the London 2012 Olympics in comparison to how some fans, and it is only small pockets of fans, are behaving at football matches, Michael?
Again, I could go off on a massive tangent here because there's this whole, you look to the Olympians as the kind of people that we want to take as role models for our next generation rather than football players. And they're two very different sports. I think the Olympics is more like of a national pride thing. Everyone comes together. You don't really get hooligans going down to watch
you had 80,000 people booing George Osborne.
But I don't think that it's the typical type of coin throwing mob that would go to the Olympics and throw coins at someone because they lost on, a javelin competition or losing the 100 metres and you got coins being pelted at Usain Bolt. But it's a very different, you've got to remember the conglomerate of people who will go to watch a football match week in, week out, that's their passion. They're probably the local gent from down the road who has an honest job, honest earnings, and that's his little bit of fun for the weekend. He doesn't go out clubbing or he doesn't go out to Knightsbridge and do shopping on a weekday. His little bit of passion at the weekend is getting the boys ready, going and having some pie, some beer and cheering his team on, and that's what he looks forward to. The Olympics, are you going to get that type of crowd down there? No, it's probably family, friends. So I think it's unfair to compare. But having said that, the fact of the matter is, look, progressively over the last 20 years, English fans have actually got better. Some of the exposure we've had going over to the likes of Turkey, I think even in Switzerland not too long ago, there was a few fans out there that caused a few problems. I think actually this is a wider scale thing than just the UK, and I think actually other countries can now start to look to us as kind of leaders of our forefront in terms of being able to say, look, this is how we look and deal with our fans who are kind of misbehaving. Maybe you guys should look at a similar punishment, because in Italy, in Turkey, it's rife out there and they get away with it as well, especially in European football when European clubs are travelling to their grounds.
Dr. Victor Thompson?
Yeah, I think the Olympics was a great experience for the nation, and I think the emphasis there was more on performance and on getting behind the nation and seeing individuals do really well and hope that the nation would do well that you're supporting. I think, as has been said, the the football fans in the football pitches, you're there with your buddies, you're there with friends.
But there were people that I mean, I went to both the Olympics and
me too.
I go to football matches every week. There are people that go. There are tons of people that go to both.
Person you're talking about, isn't it? That's what it is. I mean, just quickly, just a bit nip in. I mean, Galatasaray, they had a flag that said "Welcome to Hell." Like again, it's like goading. You're trying to goad the opposite side. You're not going to get that at the Olympics, really, are you? Let's be honest.
No, and it's not so much about one team versus the other. In the Olympic Games, it's mostly about individuals for their nation, and I think that's a bit different. And I think maybe if we had the Olympics every month, then maybe we would get more people coming together to support together and to cheer on or jeer on together, and then it would be a bit different.
Steve Powell, do we need the Olympics to kind of set an example for football?
You know what, I think I love the Olympics. It made me very proud to be a Londoner and very proud to be British. I thought we'd handled it amazingly well, much better than my wildest expectations, because we've got a bit of ability of making a pig's ear of big events, and we did this one really well. Apart from the closing ceremony, which I thought was pants, everything else I thought was brilliant. We can learn lessons. The single biggest lesson was the mobilisation of the volunteers, the games makers, I thought. And if we can mobilise that sort of atmosphere within football, where everybody takes equal ownership and part of making our game and keeping our game great, then I think that's the single biggest thing that we can take from the Olympics, because it's a very different Olympics every 4 years, very different multi-sport event, very different from football.
Jamie Jackson, final words.
I just think that in life we all like sort of drama, the spectacle of stuff, and in football you get that week in, week out. It's an absolute privilege to cover it, just speaking personally. It makes me laugh when I hear this sort of, the Olympics, should be an example to football or whatever. I just think that's quite hilarious, because human nature. Sort of say that Olympians are somehow, or the Olympic crowds are somehow paragons of self-virtue or whatever. I don't think that's quite right. But, I take the point. I was lucky enough to cover that. I enjoyed it. But, football, look, no one wants the extreme, behaviour. Of course we don't. That's horrible. It's got no place for it. And for me, zero tolerance, or 3 strikes and you're out. Goodbye, never again, would be my attitude. But, in terms of the drama of football, I don't think you could beat it. And as has been said, if the Olympics were on every weekend, which I know sounds stupid, but I understand the point I'm trying to make, I think you'd get the same kind of intrigue, etc., etc. So whatever the most popular, whatever the most focus on, almost follows on, obviously, that naturally that you're going to get all the kind of things we're talking about, which savoury stuff, as I keep on saying, we don't want. But the actual drama, the storylines, it's a soap opera, isn't it? And sometimes soap operas can be frustrating and unpalatable, but other times you've got to watch it. And I think, just speaking personally, I think football within the right parameters, common sense, is a heck of a privilege to sort of to have as a thing in our lives.
Well, it certainly brings up lots of interesting discussions and debates, but we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a discussion with me, Tim Walklate, about violence among football supporters on the Voice of Russia from London. Joining me in the studio to discuss this today was Michael Jarman, a former professional footballer and Chief Equity Strategist, Dr. Victor Thompson, a sports psychologist, and on the phone, Steve Powell, Director of Policy at the Football Supporters Federation, and Jamie Jackson, Manchester football correspondent for The Guardian and Observer newspapers. Stay tuned, the news is up next.